We're talking about parenting versus
Parenting styles in the current time, and
right,
parenting styles a generation or two generations earlier, like my time and my parents' time.
right, because there are some very big differences. Obviously, we have a generation before us that was very much approving of spare the rod, spoil the child, and this generation is more about attachment parenting is a big thing, and parenting without having to use threats and a whole slew of other things. So we wanted to just look at a few of the ways that I don't know. I guess the thing we wanted to look at the things that have influenced
Yeah.
parenting in your generation versus parenting in my generation. And I've got 3 kids, 3 small children. Paul has 4 children, 4 grown children, who also have children of their own, some of them. So we have some different viewpoints to share on the subject.
Sure. Well, I think maybe we could start off letting Virginia tell us how old each of your kids are and how long you've had them, and how your life is going today, day by day, vis-a-vis your children, and what your goals are for them, what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, well, I'll start off with their ages. So I've got a 6-year-old. Oh well, I guess he's almost 7 now. So almost 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and it's a bit of mayhem in my house.
Well,
At times. I
not
mean,
surprising.
and I mean that could be taken so many different ways, but it's a lot of energy. Let's just say.
Yeah. So, looking a little bit forward, what are you trying to do, prepare your kids for? What kind of thing? Part of your goal is obviously to have a nice family life now, but you also want to prepare them for when they grow up.
Yes, absolutely. I feel that with the internet and media just being so prolific in the amount of information that it provides, I feel that raising kids in this generation is quite overwhelming, because it's not like you just have your neighbor, judging you over the fence anymore. Like, you've got the whole online world and community telling you how you should do it, what you should feed them, how you should speak to them, when they should go to bed, how many hours they should sleep. Like, it goes on and on and on, and can be quite overwhelming. And of course, as a parent, you're trying to do the best thing for your child, but at the same time, you do want to make sure that they're able to explore freely, but also have respect and know the boundaries. And it's a lot to juggle, to
Yeah.
factor all those things in.
And to
free
what
rein.
extent do you think that and your husband Jesse are influenced by internet expectations, as opposed to what you may have learned in your tradition or from any other source?
I would say I'm hugely exposed or hugely influenced or impacted. I wouldn't say Jesse is. Jesse's not much of a technical person, so he's definitely not reading parent forums or articles on parenting or anything that's related to that. So yeah, between the two of us, it's me who's and because I'm a writer and a very literary person, I'm just constantly sifting through it all, and it's just how my brain works, right? So yeah.
So what the way your parents would have brought you up, or earlier generations, have you thought much about the comparison between then and now?
So I was brought up in a household of 8 children, and it was just definitely a measure of chaos within that. And so I felt like I was almost raised a lot by my older sister in a lot of ways, and obviously that's not the dynamic in my family. I have 3 children, so I'm able to give more of my attention to each of them than my mom was able to give to all 8 of us. So I mean, that's not, I wouldn't do that as a fair comparison, but also just I think we all learn from take what we appreciated about our upbringings and what we didn't appreciate and try to adjust it, you know. And so there's definitely aspects of my parenting that are reflective of that. Like I try to be, you know, spend more time listening to my kids. That's something that I feel that I do feel is really important, that they feel heard, that they feel respected. Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely things that I take it from.
So maybe if I could just tell you the contrast. I was born in the 40s and was sort of grew up in the 40s and 50s. And my parents grew up between 1900 and 1910. So they would have grown up in the first 20 years of the 20th century. And if you look at statistics, the world couldn't have changed more in one century than it did in the 20th century. In fact, you could almost say that if you go back to the 19th century, which is the 1800s, the world hadn't changed as much in the previous 1,000 years as we've changed in the last 100 years. And I just wanted to make this specifically oriented toward raising children and what the difference was. My parents, and I'm going to start with them rather than my family. My mother was one of 12 children. My father was one of 8. And they lived in a rural community. They were in a religious group, which many people at that time, the early 20th century, much of America and the world was very religious. And discipline was very strong, and the children were expected to work to help the family from age of 5 or 6 onward, because people were so poor. 56% of the American population were under the poverty line, and an awful lot of the rest of them were poor. The top 10% did okay, but there was no middle class when my parents were born, or very small middle class. You were either poor or you were rich, and not much was going on in between. So for my parents, if they didn't, in my parents' families, if they didn't contribute to the household work, the family almost wouldn't survive. That was the conditions economically. Mm-hmm. And people lived much shorter lives. In 1900, somebody born in 1900 could expect to live to about 47. Mm-hmm. Now, part of that's influenced by infant mortality. But by the year 2000, people could expect to live till 76. So the lives were short, poor, and I shouldn't omit that in this time period, when between my parents' childhood and mine, you had World War I, you had the Great Depression, and you had World War II. So the military had a huge influence on what was going on, and military discipline was pretty much reflected in the households. And basically people did as they were told or faced consequences.
That's so interesting, because yes, obviously we're living in a time of relative peace and prosperity in this half of the world anyway, and that with that freedom, it's almost removed the necessity to not remove, but it's made the necessity, the urgency of get in line, you know, fall in line, and working hard,
expecting, and now you work to enable your children, to educate them and make their life pleasant. We worked in order that our family would survive.
Right. Yes.
And one of the other statistics I meant to mention is my parents went to 8th grade. In their day, 7% of the population would graduate from high school. Mm-hmm. And by the year 2000, that number was up to 90% or 87%. So, I mean, it was just such a giant transition in society. And I think that's many of the reasons why parents these days think their parents did it wrong. They don't remember the context.
Interesting.
So the main thing that we were brought up for is so that we could continue working all our lifetime to support ourselves and our families. Education was probably a lower priority, notwithstanding my going off to university and to a good one. And the other thing we all learned, it was instilled in us, was to save money. And the reason for that is back when my parents were young, you wouldn't know what kind of crops you were going to have in any given year. And if the crops failed, the family had less food to eat. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you can even imagine the food scarcity in that day, or there was no central heating. Mm-hmm. So you had suffered from cold. My father said for Christmas, they would often get an orange. That would be their Christmas gift. Yeah, and I mean, think of what your children would say if you gave them an orange for Christmas.
Yes. No, right? Well, it's a completely different set of challenges. I mean, in your day, it was dealing with poverty, and there not being enough food, and war, and just
well, it wasn't
all these
so much
things.
In my day. By the time came in, we were halfway to where we are now.
Right.
But in my parents' day, I mean, they were coming out of the universal poverty all
which influenced the way that they parent.
I mean, worldwide, about 80% of the world, 85% lived in extreme poverty, like under $2 a day. Mm-hmm. That number, fortunately, is now down to about 9%.
Right. So then I wanted to just quickly look at some of the challenges that are facing parents today, because it's a completely set of different of issues, right? And I think the big one I just saw this article recently, and I've seen a few of these type of articles, but it's becoming more and more prominent that you're seeing concerns raised over mental wellness, right? Mm-hmm. And children who are growing up with parents who are distracted with their smartphones, or they're working, both mm-hmm. of them are working, so they're not really at home, and so that emotional connectiveness and the ability to develop is being suppressed in a lot of ways. So that, I mean, there's that to contend with. Yeah. And
I'd throw out the other one is that when I grew up, everybody lived in community. I mean, the idea of being cut off and having no friends and no family was a very rare thing.
Right.
Compared to what it is now.
Right.
So we knew all our neighbors and we knew all our relatives. Mm-hmm. And we spent time with them constantly. And so there were a lot of really good things. And people would get together in communities to do sports and play games and sing. And, it was a rich life in many ways. Mm-hmm. Many ways I don't feel too sorry for myself having grown up when I did. Mm-hmm. Noting why some of the differences, I mean, I went to the university during the 60s when there was the Great Revolution and threw out everything from the past, and I participated gladly in that. And everything my parents told me not to do, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't do sex, everything that they said not to do, we did. Mm-hmm. And now some of us have decided maybe some of those weren't quite as good an idea as what we used to think.
Yes. I think we, as society as a whole has to adapt to times changing, to modern inventions and advancements in technology and whatever it is. But I think we do need to hold on to at least have an understanding of where we've come from and why certain things are important in building and in cultivating lifestyles and healthy relationships and good work ethic and all of this, right?
Well, the way I look at it, my parents were passing on 1,000 generations of wisdom from before them, and in their day and in my day when we grew up, we took that wisdom quite seriously until we got to the 1960s and 70s in particular, when we thought all of this was garbage and we tossed it out the window, and whatever the next person who walked through the door, if they said, "Hey, I got some acid, do you want to do drugs?" That was more important than what 1,000 generations had passed on to their kids.
Well, and I think there's still a trickle-down effect of that. I mean, that's just very much a norm in culture today, right? I mean, especially for young adults anyway, growing up and, discovering the world and what all the things it has. offer?
Well, anyway, I'm now a grandparent, and I've got some very young grandchildren. My daughter's got a newborn child and a 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. So my wife is over today working with them and trying to help bring them up with some of the values that we grew up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so, and I think, another thought along those lines that I love about what your wife Kathy is doing is how she values her role,
Yeah.
in their lives, and so much so that she does go over there every week. And I think knowing that each one of us has a role to play in each other's lives, and valuing it, and living it, like acting on it, not just um, playing small to
Yeah.
represent some form of humility, or to protect ourselves. Or I mean, there's things that we need to do, obviously, to take care of ourselves, but I think being empowered to know that you were important as a grandparent,
Yeah.
you were important as a sister, as a brother, and
Yeah.
to not to
Well,
underestimate that.
in my daughter's life, she has a wonderful career, and you could almost say that my wife Kathy spends nearly as much FaceTime and quality time with her 2 older kids as their mother or father do, because they're working all the time and they have a nanny when she's not doing her career, well, when she's doing her career, so they don't see the kids much before they go to work, and they see them on weekends. But Kathy sees them 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very significant.
She's
I know
constant.
a lot of grandparents these days are peripheral, but I know an awful lot of the grandparents that I know who are doing similar things to what we're doing.
It's really beautiful. I love it. Is there anything else that we
No,
wanted
I
to?
think that's a reasonable, fast discussion of children and parenting and so on in the last 100 years or whatever.
Yeah, I think we just wanted to draw awareness to why things were one way in your generations and generations past, and some of the influencing factors of parenting in today's world.
Thank you guys for tuning in on our
Yeah,
conversation.
thank you so
and
much
this
for
is just
hanging out here.
things to think about. See you next time.